G'day guys, and welcome to an episode of Punters Academy. Unfortunately, I went up to film with Paul this morning, didn't check the audio. Genius effort, so we've got no audio for that whole hour's episode this morning. I thought I'd just sort of run through the questions, give us highlights of what we did. It's just a bit of a crazy drive to Paul's house to redo it, and we'll get some questions back in for next week and go again. So I've got my sidekick here, Paul. Tried to get him in as nice a shirt as I could. He's our representative today of ratings to win. I wanted to touch on Winks first up. Obviously, really incredible performance. She was held on to from the barrier attendant apparently, which has caused her to miss the start. She was a bit fractious in the gates also in the barrier trial recently, so it wasn't that big a stretch to see her miss the start, but the effort she's put in to overcome that incredible sort of wind bias that was in play, plus they've gone out around I think 14.5 lengths slow. Paul mentioned to the 600 metres, got home in about 12 lengths quicker or something similar. So she's given away that sort of bias and tempo, and then overcome also some good horses. So Fox Play's drawn third defence there, got up the inside, every possible chance, suited by a sort of a 1200 metre run, basically I say 11 1200 metre run first up, not the 14 that it showed on paper, simply due to the tempo. She's run home in 33 and got run down by a champion simply. There was nothing more that basically could have gone wrong for her other than missing the start further, and she's overcome that and run them down and quite comfortably on the line. The more you watch it, the more impressive she was, and the easier she actually did it. Bowman sort of said after the race it was all her. I didn't do a lot. He didn't panic, but sort of the more you watch it, the more you believe what he was saying to be 100% truthful. She's just a freak of a horse, and it was a freak of a performance. And even though you don't, would never have liked to see her get beaten by something like a missed start, it was a huge performance, and the tension it built and the excitement it built was probably a great thing for racing. So I doubt that she'll be stretched anything like that further into her preparation, but it's good to see her back well, and it'll be interesting to see whether they give her a little bit more time off than they first planned, or whether they go on with the plan from now on. Getting into some questions. Hey guys, love the show. I need some advice on building my bank. I'm a hobby punter that wants to get more serious. I started 12 months ago with $1,000, and in 12 months I've turned that into $5,000. I bet 3% of my bank on each of my selections, but is this dangerous in the long term? I've heard some people bet to win 3% of their bank, but not sure what is the best practice. I don't bet on every race. It might only be 2 to 3 races per meeting, but I have done the analysis on, and John's Mail, 2 to 3 meetings per, I've done the analysis on, and John's Mail, maybe 6 to 10 races per week. Any advice would be great. Thanks, Matt. Talked of, obviously, first time through this, went over it with Paul. Paul's much better at this sort of thing than me, but regurgitating what he said, your issue is that whilst everything's going well, and you've obviously done a great job to turn a $1,000 bank into $5,000 in 12 months, like a bank growth of that magnitude's a very good effort. Imagine if you obviously had started with a bigger size, that would be incredible. Most people would be very, very happy with that over that sort of period. You're not having a lot of bets, so therefore, I'm not going to call it a lucky run, but a run that builds that sort of bank can also reverse in the same sort of time. So you could easily go backwards, or 3% of time. You've only 33. It's not even 33 bets before your bank would be heavily depleted, and you don't want to put yourself in that position, because inevitably you will have a bad run, and betting that aggressively, you will destroy the bank or a large portion of it very quickly. So it's probably a good time, once you've built to a decent size off a reasonably small beginning, that you look to adopt some sort of similar method to what you've described there to win the 3% of your bank, whether that be off your price or the market price. And there's plenty of different staking methods to look at, but something a little bit more less aggressive, a little bit more conservative will probably be ideal. But obviously you're doing a good job, and keep it up, and well done on getting as far as you have. Next question. Hi Paul, really enjoy your show. I was wondering how much you use your intuition or gut feeling. For example, if I look at a race and don't get all warm and fuzzy over it after 1 or 2 minutes, within 2 minutes, I'll just pass. It was probably a better question for me, but Paul did answer it also. It sort of overlaps. The way I do things, it is much more by feel, and this sort of relates to me. It might not be 1 or 2 minutes in my case, but it will definitely be the field sort of builds with me. So whether once I'm going through the horses, I might find a horse I like. There might be a horse in there that I've been waiting for. It might be a track where I'm looking for a leader to be advantaged, or looks like it's going to get a soft lead, or another horse that I'm looking that might be in a nice trailing position. Something that clicks, and you start getting more intrigued by the race. Things fall into place more and more, and you get more excited. That's a race inevitably you're going to a bit more aggressively into, and definitely a race that you will most likely be betting into. Whereas the opposite happens, where you could even not like a horse. You could go in saying there's a short price favourite when you see a market and you get all excited and think, oh, I really want to investigate this race, and everything just doesn't fall into place. The horse you find doesn't have the right jockey, the right alley. It looks to find an average position in the race. The horse is not prepared for that distance, and every horse in the race just keeps getting falling over at a major hurdle that would stop you from betting in that race. And to me, that would be a race I would definitely be more likely to pass on, simply because my boxes aren't ticked. And basically, the warm and fuzzy feeling for me happens when those boxes continually keep getting ticked. Right stage in the preparation, going to find the right position, track and distance suit it for the day. Other horses disadvantaged in the race with queries against them, and it just keeps on and on. And you just that's your green light position. So I completely understand where Paul where this question's come from. This is Ross, sorry, and he did say love these shirts for Paul. I'm assuming Paul did answer the question, obviously, and he is a much more ratings based setup, but he does flag races for reasons, and then will add or adjust races depending on certain factors, similar to what I'm doing. So it's the same sort of setup, and his confidence obviously will be heightened by added checks and things to horses that are already been identified by his system. So it's a similar method, but he just comes about his starting point and probably can look at a lot more races than I can, than doing it a lot more manually. But I understand where you're coming from, Ross, and I agree with you. There are definitely races that you tend to want to pass pretty quickly on, just because things don't add up, and there are other races that give you warm and fuzzies that you just can't wait to run. So good question, Ross. Next question was from Sean. Hi John and Paul, loving the show, topics covered. I have a question about pricing your own markets. When starting out, I believe this should be, how would you define if your market assessment was successful? Is it all results driven, finding winner or lays that are good or bad value compared to your market? Or are there other ways to quantify if you are on the right track? Thanks in advance for getting to my question. Regards, Sean. Markets are obviously a very personal thing. Everyone comes about them different ways. I'd say the best way to define if you're doing a good job of the market is by repricing the market after the races, firstly, and that's especially when you don't have a big sample size. So when the sample size has grown, you can obviously try and work out, every horse you've priced in a certain bracket, say $3 to $3.50, how they're performing, what percentage of them are winning compared to what price you're marking them. So it's, so 33% of your horses are winning, and at your average price of $3, you're doing a good job. That's pretty much basically the easiest way to work it out. But until you have a good solid sample size, I like to go back and reprice markets after the races. So if I've marked a horse $4 or $5, whether it's won or lost, I want to go back after the race and see whether what I believed would happen before the race has happened. Has something, has it performed better than I expected? Worse? Why? Is there anything to explain it? Is there a bias in play? That's the only way I can really test my markets to see if they're any good. And obviously it's not, there are plenty of explanations for why things happen during races, and it helps you to investigate your races when you sort of go back and reprice them. So it's a double-edged sword. You're keeping a check on yourself, and you're also checking the races out to see if there was anything strange at play that may have affected, not just the horses in race you're checking, but the whole program. So it's a good bias and pace and check as well. But yeah, and it's also not just, as I was saying, simply on performance. So say you've got a horse marked at 10 to 1, and 2 to 1, and it wins at 10 to 1. You've got to be really careful not to be biased to yourself as well, and try and be realistic and go back and say, listen, I got this right this time, but did things go in its favour to win? If they ran the race again, what would be the expected outcome? Would you expect the reason for it to happen? You might then reprice it, it's possible, to be shorter. But when the market settles at sort of $10 in a city race, you'd expect it to be pretty close to right. And for you to, if you were coming up with, say, a price of $3, you'd want to find substantial edge that you've got over the market to explain why that differential was. The country's a bit different. You can be, the SPs are a little bit more volatile, so you can find a pretty solid edge there from time to time. But in the city, it's tough to be that far ahead of the market that often. And if you are, I'd be really checking a lot of those just to make sure that you're not being a bit erratic with your prices, a bit aggressive, and you just need to work out what's going on there with your markets. But another good question, the second part to it, finding a winner or lays that are good or bad value compared to your market. So they're both similar. If we're finding a winner, I want to, depends on their racing pattern, obviously, which builds into your confidence. So if I price a horse at $3.50 and it looks like getting on pace favours, and it's a horse with a good speed and can get itself out of trouble, a bit of acceleration, I'm much more confident in that horse and where it's going to be and what's going to happen. Whereas I could price another horse $3.50 and it could be obviously shorter in the market most likely, but if I price a horse $3.50 that looks like it's going to need a bit of speed on, it's going to need run-on conditions, and it gets back, that's a horse that I want to get better value about most likely as well. So a horse with a positive racing pattern, I'm happy to take a little bit shorter price. So say if I want to take 10% over my value, my price, or even the same as, whereas a horse that needs favours and needs things, I might want a 20% edge before betting. And it's basically the opposite with lay betting. I'm very conservative with horses that are going to find a positive, challenging position. So something on pace, I really want to stay away from laying them unless it's extreme. Say I've got something priced at $6 or $7 because I think it might be very weak, and it's $2 or $3 in the market, I might chime into it. But I want a big edge over the market to chime into a lay in an aggressive position, whereby, again, if it's the opposite, so say a horse I've got priced $3 to $50, it's going to find a dodgy position. There's every chance that the tempo is going to be against it, and it's going to need luck. I'm probably happy to lay closer to my assessed price, or much closer to my assessed price, than I would a horse that's going to be in a winning position naturally. So that's just my opinion. There's plenty of ways to do it, and I think Paul, again, was pretty similar to me there. He wants to be more lenient on horses finding popular positions, but that's also marked into your price. But yeah, lay betting, especially for me, you want to find horses that are vulnerable, not just because of their ability, but where they're going to be, and have a few things against them to really back you up. I'm just going to stop there and come back again for part 2, and thanks, guys. Welcome back for part 2, guys. Again, apologies for messing up this morning with the audio. Definitely be back next week full strength with Paul and his insightful information that he provides. Getting back to the questions. Hi, this is from Jason. Hi, love the show. Just wondering if either of you play exotics like Quinellas and Trifectas, and if so, when are you likely to play? We both answered this question pretty similarly. We were both interested in exotics and played them a lot more heavily back probably 7 or 8 years ago, when rebates were at their highest. You could get probably 10% rebate plus on exotics, Quinellas, Trifectas, and other exotics. You were also able to bet into a lot larger pools than before. The corporates were betting on all these different exotics and not throwing the money back into the pool. So since then, it also got to a stage where you were playing against the big syndicates as well, and when that money was removed, the sort of meat in the money, any little bit of overs that were there, the big syndicates were crunching down. Not saying that they're getting on, after 100 metres or 200 metres or new results before they were getting on, but I do think that the big players have access to really finalised information, and they were able to bet different prices down as they do with win and place pools. You'll see, they've got the ability to make them the same price across the totes when they want to. And then they do the same with exotics, so they might have a quinella priced up at $7 or $8. They'll bet it down to say $9 if they're happy with that, and with that ability, it cuts a bit of the value out of the pools. Obviously, the meat coming out of the pools with the hobby punters, all betting mostly now with corporates, and that money staying in their pockets is also detrimental towards the pools that we can bet into. And obviously, if you've got a bit of an idea, the corporates tend to cut you off from all sort of exotic betting. So for me personally, it's tough these days unless I want to bet directly into the pools, which is usually carnival times when they can handle a bit of pressure. I don't really do a lot of it myself. I do advise to bet into the quinellas and trifectas a little bit when I don't like favoured runners in the race. So a short price favourite, I might find that as a good race to bet in. Also big fields, sort of 15 to 20 horse fields, you tend to find the exotics pay really well in those too if you can identify a bit of an edge. So quinellas, trifectas in bigger pools, and quadrillas in carnival times, and when there's jackpots and things like that are great as well. The quadrilla is a really good bet type for the more educated punter, because the takeout's only 20% across the 4 races. So that's not a bad effort to bet into those pools, and not a bad idea if you think, especially if you've got 1 or 2 races you really like in there, you can find an edge. Good question from Jason. The next question was a question from Grant, and we did touch on it I did touch on it with Paul earlier when we filmed it the first time round. Neither of us had ever heard of this. I've heard the term terraced weight, TERRACED, terraced weight, being used in a number of factors overseas. Being used in a number of factors used overseas. Used here different manner, I'd assume. Would you, Paul, be able to validate through your system, maybe Hong Kong data, if the body weight, height of a horse has any impact in one horse beating another? So what he goes on to say is basically, if 2 horses pair off, does the weight and size of that horse over the other horse have a factor on the finish or the positions? It's a tough one to really track. It's a tough one to find any history on, I'd say. It's a really interesting but difficult question, and probably just went a little bit over our heads, to be honest. The one thing I thought it did bring up was body weight, and it is something I'd really love to be included in form guides here. It's part of greyhounds here. It's part of horse racing overseas in other jurisdictions, definitely in Hong Kong. And when they provide body weight for horses, it's very easy it's easier to track where those horses are up to in their preparations. Usually they're pretty consistent with weight. Once they get to a certain age, they rarely continue to put on, over and over, like every time they don't come back heavier. So a horse like Winx on Saturday, Chris Waller would have been targeting to get her to her first up racing weight, which, say, for argument's sake, was 530 kilos. If she weighed in at 550 before that race, a few alarm bells would go off that maybe she's not going to perform to her usual first up peak. If she was lighter than normal and lighter than a normal racing weight, you might even be worried that she hasn't come up at all, like she might have had a bad spell. And this is just using Winx, like it's highly unlikely to happen with a horse of her calibre, but the lower the grade, the more interesting and more useful those numbers would be for mine. It's just, when horses create a peak rating, for people who use ratings, their weight would be interesting to them first up, and as they progress, you can normally tell if a horse is holding or putting on weight during its preparation. It's really thriving and coping well with racing. Horses that back up quickly, their weights are very interesting and very important. There's plenty of useful times that I would use body weight, so I would love that to be involved, but obviously it's up to the racing bodies to include it, and hopefully one day it is. Last question from Luke. Hey guys, I'd like to start by saying how much I love the show and appreciate the time you guys put in. Firstly, I was wondering if you could tell us a little about your background and how you got into horse racing punting, and if there was anything in particular that helped you to get to be as successful as you are today. Basically, racing was a lot different. Paul and I answered this very similarly. 15 to 20 years it took him to get in, to where he is, maybe even a little bit longer. I'm probably around the same sort of mark. When I started out, I was just really learning from anyone I could, watching, listening. Went to the races every day for 5 years. You ran into some interesting people, and some of the people I learnt the most off were the quirkiest and true racing characters. There was one a postman from Sydney who I learned a lot from. He's if you ran into him in the street, you'd think he's nearly stark raving mad, and the way he thought about racing and the way he conveyed it to me was incredible, and I'll be sort of forever in his debt for things that he's told me. And it's only just little, you just get thinking about things a different way, and it all sort of falls into place and makes sense. And the only time that really happened with me was when I worked for Gelco's. It's a game of not overthinking, but quantifying what you see. So it's a two-part equation for me. Knowing what to look for, looking for it, finding it, and then proving it's true. So using your statistics, your sectionals, biases, and those sort of things, checking for them to quantify what you're visually seeing. It can be very easy that you can be negative towards something, but the times say don't be. So you leave that runner alone, and it can be the opposite. You can be really positive on some vision, and the times don't back it up, and you may even go the other way and to be negative against that horse because other people out there are seeing it as a positive, and if they're not backing it up with information, there could be an edge there. So these are the sort of things it took me a long time to learn. These sort of things are now so available through podcasts like this. Daniel O'Sullivan stuff, Racing Rant, do similar things. Mark Lambourne's really, incredible with his racing brain and what he shares. There are so many people like that do, even Darren Potter down in Melbourne. Anything you can listen to, I find all I was doing when I was growing up and around racing and trying to learn was asking people why, constantly, I like number 6, I like UPIO, why? And if they could give me an answer, I would just thrive upon what their answer was, and try and dissect it later, and just about write it down in my book why they like this horse, and then go back and see what I could take away from it, what I agreed with, what I didn't agree with, what seemed to work, what I could leave behind, and then go on to the next person. I was never really interested in someone wanting to tip me a horse, but I was also always interested in what their reasoning was behind that tip, and why they believed that horse was suited in this race on this occasion. If they couldn't give me a reason, they weren't worth listening to. If it was not, you never knock anyone for sharing their opinion, but anyone who can't give you reasoning for why they like something, they're basically guessing. And if they say, if they don't want to tell you why, it's not of much use anyway, even if the horse wins that day, whatever. But for learning wise, I'm always asking why. And you're not as if you're questioning people's integrity. I just want to know what's behind your reasoning. That's all it is. And can I pick anything up off you? And can I use it in the future to strengthen my own set of skills? So that took a long time for me, and it was probably a lot more difficult than it is these days, because if you search online, you can really pick up a lot. I've got every phone known to man ringing here. Apologies, this won't ring for long. Should have put them on silent. But yeah, so that's a great question, and I think the landscape's changed today where you really can self-educate through podcasts and things you can find on the internet. The Betfair Hub's another great place for great information. How long can that possibly ring for? It's yeah, so there's plenty of great information out there, and you can basically put yourself through your own little punting university course, but always be checking. Don't just take people's word for gospel. always form your own opinion, test things, and come up with your own opinion, your own style. Because not the same system doesn't work for everyone. Not everyone's brain works the same, and there's plenty of ways to get to an outcome in this game where you're still ahead of the pack. So that sort of touches again on Luke's next question. Secondly, as a professional punter, do you guys feed off each other or others alike, and second opinions in a race or about a horse, for example? And does it help you with your own thoughts, or is it still important to back your own opinion overall, as I've heard many say before? Obviously, if you can qualify yourself a selection or something, you definitely got to stick with your own opinion. There's no doubt about that. But it definitely doesn't hurt to have a little base of people that you're happy to bounce things off, people you trust, people you know are like-minded people passionate in the game for whatever reason. They don't even have to be highly skilled. They can just talk. You can just talk it through with them, and you'll pick up things that you missed, or possibly you'll just second run through things and pick up little pearls of wisdom sort of thing that you might have missed the first time around. It's very easy when you're doing form by yourself to miss things, skip over things, and when you're just talking it through, it can be a great advantage. Like-minded people obviously are even like people that are skilled or at the same level as you, or a little bit better, or even better to talk to, because you definitely will just pick things up. Say you've got something marked $3 and it's $10, and you just want to check that it's correct. There can be that sort of edge in it. The horse will probably firm, but it's very difficult to sit there by yourself and really believe that it's true without having a second opinion. So if you can find a few people, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people that you can talk to about racing, it's a great thing. I've obviously got a set of people, and I do a lot of form late at night, so there's a couple of people on Twitter I tend to bounce things off, and they do the same, and it's totally invaluable to me, because it's just about making sure that what you're seeing is correct, and before making a move yourself. So good questions, and 100% true. Obviously you do have to trust your own overall opinion, but having people to check over what you're saying and thinking can never hurt. Lastly, how the hell does anything ever beat Winks again? Saturday was just ridiculous. If you were the owner trainer, what would you do now after she wins the third Cox Plate? I don't see a way that they can. Any horse in the world that I've seen can beat Winks. Only bad luck can beat her. She's just got the ability to overcome just about anything, as what we saw on the weekend. She overcome a slow tempo with a bias included. It doesn't get much worse than that, and without a bad check. If she was mine, she'd be going to Royal Ascot. I'd love to win a race there, and I don't think she'd have any trouble destroying a field there. That uphill straight really would suit her style. It wouldn't matter how far she ran over. If Chris Waller decided to get her ready for anything from a 1200 to a 2000 metre race, I don't think it would matter. I think she'd be beating them, and it would be just so exciting to do it. Obviously the mare's health and well-being comes first. She's already earned $15 million and 18 straight and all these crazy things she's accomplished, so she owes no one anything, and hopefully they look after her, number one. But I'd love to see her overseas, even not as an owner, so hopefully she gets there. Last thing I wanted to do was just touch on this up and coming stakes from Saturday. It's obviously a gateway race to races like the Golden Rose and possibly the Derby for a few horses that were kicking off in the up and coming on the weekend. And I'd just like to go through a few of the runners, the qualifying the race. So the interesting part, the reason why I believe the race will be a pretty solid form race, and why it's one that can be used throughout the carnival, is because a lot of the races on Saturday were run at pretty slow tempos. Basically, before the meeting, a lot of people believed that strong winds predicted would be hurting leaders early, which sort of changed a lot of stables' tactics. And it also allowed people that got to the front to stack them up and really take advantage of that soft tempo and then sprint off it. So the beauty of the up and coming stakes was that it was run at a fairly solid tempo, and they've sprinted off that. Also, that the leaders were heavily advantaged in a lot of races. These two runners have come from midfield. There obviously were a couple of runners unlucky in the race. Toga Pictor was heavily mentioned in the steward's report, pulled up coughing, was dragged out of the race at the start, ran up their backsides in the straight before getting to the outside, and just looked to peak on his run late, but the coughing sort of is the only thing you need to hear to forgive that horse, including the other things. It probably should have finished third comfortably. Ace High was a bit unlucky in behind the pace, held up behind tiring runners, nothing to do with its own effort, and nothing much the jockey could do there. So its effort was strong, and it was strong to the line. Had the run under its belt, but still looks a bit of a smoky for the Derby for mine. And the first and second runners, Dracaries and Gold Standard, absolutely did nothing wrong. Gold Standard just improves every start. Its first up effort was good. Its second up win was solid, sitting outside the pace. This time it misses the start, has to bullock out, and comes with Dracaries only beaten narrowly with a nice gap behind. It's a horse right on the up. No knock at all on Dracaries. Force wide, come from midfield. Only second up in its preparation, and definitely can't knock him. Sanctioned was first up, sat outside the leader, and probably lucky to hold on to third, but definitely a horse looking for further. And obviously stablemate as well. So I think from a Derby perspective, I'm interested in Toga Picture, I'm interested in Ace High, and I'm interested in Sanctioned. From a Golden Rose perspective, I definitely can't put a line through either Gold Standard or Dracaries as yet. They're both probably not the most impressive I've seen yet, and definitely not probably entitled to be favourite in the race, but can be competitive. And if Gold Standard's probably the one that looks more bulletproof and really hard to knock. So a race that can be followed with a bit of confidence, I believe, going forward. There'll be some. I'll be very surprised if a feature race over the Carnival isn't picked up by a runner from this race. Even Cuba down the bottoms, effort was very strong, racing well out of its grade at the moment. I was asked about Golden Rose prices, early prices, and I haven't really had a chance to dissect them too much. I did see a runner today take part in some trials that I've got a huge opinion of by the name of Beau Jest. It's a Godolphin runner, probably set to resume something like the Run to Rose if it can get in there, or it might just have a benchmark, another benchmark go, because I think it's only won a midweek maiden to this point from its one start. I think it's around the $34, 40 to 1 mark at a few places, and it's worth specking for mine early. Just looking through them, I can't find too much value in the likes of Kemetari, Minari, Pariah, these horses. So looking a bit further outside the market, and it was the one that came up with Beau Jest, but not too serious in early betting just yet. There's still a bit more to come. I think markets won't be too dramatically changed from horses unless they're super impressive in their lead up. So I'd prefer to see these 3-year-olds come back and have a run before really getting involved in early markets for these big races. So again, sorry for missing out on Paul. The sidekick was here just instead for Paul with a lovely shirt, but he'll be back with another colourful edition next week, hopefully, and his inside will be back on board. So thanks guys, and look forward to next week.